There isn't much of an introduction today. We are going to be building the Wordle game, just as the title suggests. Welcome to our 50th episode. Welcome to the big end. At the time that you're watching this, Wordle is probably the biggest thing that's happening on Twitter right now. Almost everyone is rushing to post their Wordle scores every day on Twitter, and I think the best scores are like 3 out of 6 or 4 out of 6. Anyways, Wordle is a word game developed by a developer called Josh Wardle. Players have 6 attempts to guess a 5-letter word, and the feedback for every time you attempt or you give an attempt is given in the form of these colors. These are typically the colors. We will attempt to use the same colors when we are building our own Wordle game. Anyways, that being said, if the word is this dark gray or whatever, then it isn't in the target word at all. If it is orange, then it is there in the target word, but it's in the wrong spot. Or if it is green, then you know that it's definitely in the word and is in the right spot. And they've given an example as to how it could work. One of the attempts that they've made is flash. FLA is there, but SH is not even there in the word. He's made another attempt and it gives you the correct word. All right, so that's how you basically win the Wordle game. Let's try an attempt and win one Wordle game and see how it goes. All right, so I will start with FIFTH. Oh my God, only H is in the right word. Okay, I'm going to try HOUSE. Only H and S are in the word, but they are at the wrong place. So maybe it is CHOS. No, CHOSE or chose. So H is definitely now in the right place, and S is not in the right. S is there in the word, but it is not in the right place. Maybe it's at the very end, maybe it's at the very beginning. I'm not going to embarrass myself by trying to solve it and getting it wrong. But anyways, that being said, this is how you play the Wordle game. And my idea is that we'll basically try to create a clone of the Wordle game today. All right. So the idea that I have is that my Wordle game will be divided into 3 sections. The first section would be where your attempts are actually shown. It will have 6 rows and each row will have 5 columns, allowing you to enter 5-letter words. It will have a message, if I want to display any messages like you've won or you've lost or, it's not a valid word or something like that. I want to show a message, where I'm highlighting, and the keyboard, of course. This is the virtual keyboard. Wordle games that are online typically allow you to, if you play it on the desktop, it will allow you to basically type in the letters from your keyboard and and the words will appear on the screen. Or if you're on your mobile, you can also tap it. Even if you're on the desktop, you can still use the virtual keyboard to essentially enter letters. Now, if you look at the keyboard closely, it very closely matches the QWERTY keyboard that we have, except for the very last row where I want to have some 4 extra buttons. One to cancel the entire row. There is a backspace. There is an enter key to signify that you have finished entering a word. And then finally a reset button. The reset button essentially is, when you are finished playing one Wordle game, you click the reset and then you go on to the next game, or you start with the next game. With that being said, let's first start by designing the HTML and the CSS required to render something like this on the screen. We'll begin with the HTML code. We'll include the codespace API.js file and give it a nice title. The contents of the Wordle clone will be contained within a container div tag. The container div will have 3 div tags inside it: a puzzle div, a div to show the messages, and finally a div to display the virtual keyboard. Let's also include a sample message in each one of these 3 divs so that we know where each section is on the screen. All right, let's see what that did, right? And I refresh the screen, that you can see that the 3 divs that we put and the contents inside those divs are appearing over here, but they don't look at all like the design that we had in mind. So let's introduce a CSS file, a style sheet, and just make sure that all of this content looks like the design that we had. Let's start with the style sheet. We'll create a class for the container and give it style elements like so. We'll also do the same for the contents of the container. I want the contents of the div to be centered, which is what you're seeing right now. Let's also give some nice font for the message. Once done, we'll include the CSS in the main HTML file and give the class names to the various divs that we have created. Let's look at our keyboard design once again. You'll notice that we have 4 rows of keys. Each row is separated from its previous row by a margin. Each key has a rounded border around it and the key letter is centered on it. Remember that each key must account for the mouse hovering on top of it, so we'll write a hover style for each of the keys as well. On top of that, remember that in Wordle, each letter must have the ability to show different colors depending on where that letter stands in the final result. And what I mean by that is those gray, orange, or green. The letters must have the ability to have those specific color. All right. So let's write the styles for all of that. We'll begin by creating a row style. The contents of this are centered. Next, we'll declare the keychar style. Here, we are giving it width, borders, padding, margin, colors, and cursor design. Its contents are also centered. We'll add the hover transition and give it an orange background. Next, the keys need to be of specific colors when the letter of the puzzle word is either not present or is in the right place or is the right letter but in the wrong place. These are declared as their own styles with color schemes that I think are closest to the original. Next, on our HTML, let's create a keyboard row and add 4 keys to it. Each key will have a different design, signifying if the letter is either in the right place or is not present, or is in the right letter but in the wrong place. Let's see what that did. The keys are actually generated as per the design. The hover also works very beautifully. So when I hover my mouse on top of it, you can see that the background color changes, and when I remove it, it retains whatever original color it had. I think we have sort of nailed down what the colors are supposed to look like. With that being said, let's go ahead and do the puzzle contents. Let's design and code our puzzle cell. Each cell has a fixed width and height. It has a dotted border like so. The contents of the cell are also supposed to be centered on the cell. With that in mind, let's code the styles for the cells. As with the keyboard character, we'll create a style called cell and give it a dashed border, a fixed width and height, and other styles to make it as per our design. The contents of the cell are also centered. And just like the keyboard, we'll declare samples of each cell and show some contents in them to see how they look. Let's see if that worked. When I refresh, yes, the different characters are displayed in their cells properly as we intended and as per our original design. I think with that being done, let's also do the various styles for the messages that go when some event happens on the Wordle. The message style is straightforward. Its contents are centered and have a monospace font. Messages can also be of 3 types. They can either be regular, error messages, or it can be success messages. So on the CSS, we have added the 3 different types of messages or the message types that you can have. Let's see them in use. This is what by default it looks like. So if I add, let's say, error message class to the existing class, you'll see that it appears red, as an error message should appear. And then if I can have success message, this is what it'll look like. And I can either remove this or I can add the regular message to basically see what the regular message would look like. Now that we've completed writing the styles for the virtual keyboard and the puzzle cells, we can start building the necessary HTML to render all of them on the screen. However, the HTML necessary to show all the pieces and the keys will become very verbose. I think it is better to generate them using JavaScript. So let's just do that. Let's start by writing the keyboard part of the code. The keyboard is supposed to look like that, where we have 3 rows of characters followed by a 4th row, which is supposed to be our special buttons. So let's do just that. Let's start by creating a common file called wordle.js. We'll add 3 variables containing the characters of the 3 rows. We'll change the HTML so the bottom row containing the special characters are hard-coded. We'll put the necessary HTML entities to render cancel, backspace, enter, and reset buttons. Each button should also have a data attribute indicating the character it has. We'll create a new file to render all of the pieces of the puzzle called wordlepuzzle.js. In the HTML, we'll also hard-code the 4 rows. Getting back to the JavaScript, we'll add each row of the document and we'll add the keyboard character as its own div element. We'll do this in its own function. Once we've done the code for one row, we'll simply clone the code for the rest of the rows. We'll include the newly created JavaScript files onto our HTML file. Finally, let's add the main function to our Wordle.js JavaScript file in the form of the load event. This function will load the keys onto the div by calling the add keys function. This is done. Let's refresh the screen and see what happens. You can see that the keys are now generated as per what we wrote in the logic. With that being done, let's also give the same treatment for the puzzle pieces and the puzzle cells. Moving on to the puzzle cells, we would also be generating them dynamically using JavaScript. So let's get to that. We'll add variables indicating that we need the puzzle to have 6 rows and 5 columns. We'll create a function to add the puzzle blocks. We'll loop through the number of rows and add a div for each row. This is done in its own function, of course. Once the row has been added, we'll create a function to add the puzzle cell. The puzzle cell, just like the row, creates the div element, gives it a specific ID, and appends them to the document. Once done, we'll invoke the function in our main load function. Let's refresh our screen and see what happens. It appears that we have an error over here. So let's just check the console. Yes, there is an error over here. And I suspect what's happening is that we have not passed this puzzle div as parameter to the add puzzle row function. So let's just fix that. Let's also make sure that all of our variables are used as they are supposed to be. And when I refresh, you can see that the puzzle cells and the puzzle keyboard appear as intended. Let's just also fix these messages so that we have a common function where I can add whatever message I want, and then we'll move on.
Since these are common functions, we will add them in our main Wordle.js file. We'll add a function called setMessage that takes 2 parameters, a message and a type. The type indicates what type of message it is. Each type adds its own style class to the message div.
So let's test that message we wrote, or the setMessage function we wrote. So when I say setMessage, error message of type is 3, you can see that the error message will now appear like so. We should be able to retry this. This is what a normal message will appear as. If I set it as 2, say this is my success message. This is what it should do. All right, moving on. Let's move on with the logic of the game. We'll begin by adding the necessary events for Wordle to work. There are 2 kinds of events that we need to add. One for the virtual keyboard, so that if I click on the keyboard, on the virtual keyboard, the letter is added to the cells. And if I type the letters from my actual keyboard, then the same effect happens, as in the letters get filled onto the cells. We'll start by creating an add events function that will call 2 other functions. One for the virtual keyboard and other for the actual physical keyboard. The add virtual keyboard queries all the keychar elements on the document, loops through them in a for each, and adds the click event to the div. Remember that because we have given the data attribute to each keychar, we can use that to figure out what virtual key was pressed. We'll add the actions for the restart, enter, cancel, and backspace keys to begin with. For all other keys, we'll simply get the character ID from the data attribute and check what character was pressed. For the real actual keyboard, we'll define the add keyboard events function where we will add the key down event to the entire document. We'll have to handle the escape, enter, and backspace keys. For all other keys entered on the keyboard, we'll simply evaluate the character key from the key code for now. Finally, let's invoke the add events from our main load event. Alright, so for now we have added the functions that add the events. Now when I actually go to the result and do stuff or even type stuff, nothing happens because we've not yet programmed what is supposed to happen. But what we can do is maybe on the key down, we can just simply console log the event.key code so that we at least know that something is happening. And let's also just simply console log the character ID. All right. So if I say console.log character ID. So if I do this, I should see something logged on the console. All right. So if I do this, if I now type this, you can see whatever key that I have typed is getting logged over here. All right. Or restart or enter or this thing. And now I'm going to use my keyboard and you can see that the key codes get typed. But of course there is nothing that will happen because we have not written that yet. So let's do that. As a first step, let's add the ability to add characters to the cells when something is typed. So as you already know, this is the number of rows that we have and this is the number of columns that we have. We already have a variable that holds the number of rows and the number of columns, but we need an indication that can, or we need variables that can say where we are in the current puzzle solving steps, right? So if I need a way to know that I am right now on the first row or on the second row and so on and so forth, and which column also I am on each row. So we'll start with that. We'll create an array that holds the word array. We'll initialize the word array so that each row is in itself an array. Each row holds one guess of the game. Next, let's create a function called add character that takes in a character as parameter. We'll add some validations such that it's not possible to add any more letters than there are defined columns and also any more guesses than there are defined rows. Once all the validations are complete, we'll increment the column so that it allows to enter the next letter on the puzzle cell. We'll create a render puzzle function that we will define now. This function loops through the rows and columns and renders the letters of the word array onto the puzzle cell. Finally, we'll call the add character function from the keyboard events. Let's include the JS file in our main HTML file, and we'll invoke the array init in our main load event. We've added all of the events. Let's just refresh this page. When I click on the virtual keyboard, the words get added to the cells properly, but as soon as it reaches the end of the cells, nothing happens because we've run out of cells. We've also not accounted for what happens when I press the enter key or when I press this button. All right, it is supposed to go to the next row, but obviously it won't work because we have not accounted for that. So let's just add all of the events necessary to handle the escape, the backspace, and the enter key. For the backspace, we'll create a function called erase last char. We'll validate if we are not already in the first character, and after that, we'll simply set the character at the current location to undefined. For the escape key, we'll create a function called erase current row that will simply set the value of the current row to an empty array. Remember, each of these functions calls the render puzzle function at the end. Next, we will write the row complete function that will be invoked when the enter key is pressed. It validates to check if the rows have exceeded or if the word is not yet complete. Once done, it will also call the render puzzle and increment the current row to the next row and set the column to 0. Next, we'll invoke the functions we created in the keyboard and virtual keyboard events. I think we've finished coding that. Let's see what that does. I'll refresh, and now I can enter something. I can remove the entire row. That works. I can remove it character by character. Now let me try my keyboard. That works. When I press enter, it says word is not defined. There is an error. So let's just fix that. I think the issue is that this is not word, but it's actually word array, because it's an array. It's a double dimensional array. Let's refresh and see what happens. I suppose I'm in the next row now. Let's see if that works. Yes, of course it works. And when I press escape, the entire row goes, or I can press backspace. All right. I think we are almost done with all the events. You can see that I can now enter more than, I can continue to type. There is no checks to see if these are valid words, to see if I have won or if I have lost. And also there is no highlighting happening. So I think that's our next step. As of now, we only have the design, the events, and the necessary logic to make the UI of the game work. We are now at a point where we have to add the meat of the game logic. We have to check if the entered word on a row is a valid word. We also have to generate a puzzle word, set a target puzzle word, and check if the entered word has any matches with the puzzle word. Now for Wordle to work, we will need a list of all the 5-letter words in the English dictionary, right? And that's what I have here. For those of you who are regulars, you will remember that we already have a list of the English words with us from the anagram episode. We simply filtered the list to only include 5-letter words. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to set this as a variable, pick one word as the puzzle word, and work with that, for the meat of the Wordle game. We'll copy the words and make it a string in JavaScript. We'll have to split this and store it in an array. This will happen in a function called initWordArray. We'll write a function called pickRandomWord that will pick a word randomly out of this 5-letter word array. I've renamed the function to init 5-letter array, and I'm calling this and the pickRandomWord when the code is being loaded. All right. So when the document gets loaded, I init this and I pick a random word. So if I now go to the UI and if I refresh and if I call the puzzle word, you'll see that a new puzzle word is being generated. I can actually, of course, call the pickRandomWord function once again, and then I can say puzzle word, and you'll see that a new word is being generated. So we know that works. So we will now have to ensure that whatever I enter over here matches this, or if it doesn't match, I'll have to basically highlight it on the character array or the cells over here. We have a function called row complete that is called when you either click on the virtual keyboard enter key or when you hit enter on your keyboard. All right, so the first thing that we'll need to check is to see if the word that you have entered appears in the dictionary. If not, then we'll set a message and we'll just simply return. Let's start with that validation. This should be a fairly straightforward check. We'll get the typed word by joining the array of the current row. We'll check if the 5-letter array contains the word we typed. If not, we'll set an error message and return. Let's go back to our screen, refresh, and let's type in a word that is obviously not in the dictionary. Hit enter. You'll see that it says it's not a valid word. All right. And now we have the option to go back and then press this, but you will see that this error message is not going away. So what we'll do is, when you press enter, obviously we'll just sort of make this a space so that nothing appears when you press enter. All right, so that the message is the message box is essentially reinitialized. I also need to remove this messages go here, so I'll just go back to my HTML and remove this so that it is initialized properly and it looks exactly as it is supposed to. All right. So we can just fix this in the CSS so that it doesn't move around when there is nothing on the screen. Let's say, for instance, that our puzzle word is the word axiom. That's the target word that you're supposed to arrive at. And the word that you have guessed in the current row is, magic. Now, how are we going to do this comparison? So the idea that I have is that I take both the guessed word and the puzzle word. Now, since they are of the same length, I can just simply go through them as an array, one character by one character, and then I can compare if they are the same. While I'm doing the comparison, I can actually check if the guessed word appears anywhere in the puzzle target word. If it does, I can mark it as yellow. If it doesn't, then I can mark it as gray. Now, if the guessed word, if the current character of the guessed word and the puzzle word are the same, I simply have to mark them as green. I've not shown it here as such, but that's the logic that I'm going to write. And that, I think, would be the meat of our Wordle logic. We'll loop through each column of the current row and get the character on the board and also the character at the current puzzle word. If these two characters match, then we will add the right place style to the classes of the puzzle cell and the virtual key so that it appears green in color. We've just completed one check of the 3 checks we need to perform for the Wordle puzzle. Let's check if that worked. I'll refresh the screen. Before I test this, let me check what the puzzle word is and see what its value is. This, of course, immediately highlights an issue. Anyone who knows to use the console can simply print the puzzle word. In the future, we can hide the actual value of the word. One immediate and probably short-term fix that we can do is to perform a base 64 encoding of the puzzle word and decode it just before we need to check its value. But we'll leave that to another day. Anyways, that being said, the puzzle word is 4th. I will type in something that is very close to this one. So maybe I'll just say FOR or FIFTH. And you will see that it highlights all of the words that match the puzzle word. It highlights it as expected. This happens in both the puzzle cells as well as the virtual keyboard. There are 2 more checks we need to do. One is to check if the letter appears anywhere in the puzzle word and highlight it with that yellow we decided, and to check if the letter does not appear anywhere in the puzzle word. Those will be highlighted as the dark gray. Let's code those in. Next, let's check if the letter appears anywhere on the puzzle word. If it does, then we'll highlight the puzzle cell and the virtual keyboard key in the right letter style, which I think is that yellow color that we defined. The final check is to check if the letter doesn't appear anywhere on the puzzle word. If not, then we'll make it that predefined gray style. Alright, with that done, let's just go back to the browser and refresh it. I'm going to type in the puzzle word. The puzzle word shown here is traps. To check if all the highlights are working, I'm going to guess the word ready. You can see that R is highlighted as yellow because it appears somewhere in the word, but it is not in the right place. E, D, and Y are dark gray because they don't appear anywhere in the puzzle word. And A is highlighted as green because it is in the right place and is of course in the word. I think the only thing that's remaining are to ensure that the game tells us if we have won or lost. So let's code that in. We'll start by creating the variables to indicate if the game has been won or lost. A game has been won if the type word is the same as the puzzle word. We'll set the isOne flag to true and set a message showing that we have won. A game has been lost if the current row has reached its end and if the game has not been won yet. We'll set the isLost flag to true and set a message of the error type and also show the correct puzzle word. Let's go to the Wordle.js and do some cleanup with removing the log statements. We'll add the validation statements on our events so that we don't accept any more events if the game has been won or lost. When the restart button is clicked on the virtual keyboard, we'll reset all the variables of the game and generate a new random puzzle. We'll also have to reset the board so that all the styles are removed. We'll call the render function and set the message box to empty. Let's define the reset puzzle pieces function. This function first loops through all the virtual key div elements and resets their styles to just the keychar style. It also loops through the puzzle board cell by cell and resets their style to each cell to just the cell style. Finally, the reset puzzle function is then called from the reset action. I think we are at the very end of our coding session. Let's go to the browser and give it a good refresh. Let's type in the puzzle word. It's Genoa. I'm not even sure what that means. I'm going to type in jeans just to make sure that everything is getting highlighted. Let's try the big int. Yes, it says it's not a valid word. I'm going to press escape so that but you can see that this message doesn't go away. So I'm just going to go back to the browser, go back to the wordpuzzle.js, and over here, when I press the escape key, it calls this erase current row, and I'm just going to say set message, just put a nice white space over there, comma 1, just to signify that it's a regular message. Press Ctrl 5 again. My puzzle word is 8. I'm going to say 5th, just to see if it works. The big int, not a valid word. Escape, try something else, FORTY, which is also not right. And I'm going to give in 5 correct words, but not the correct puzzle words, just to see if it shows the proper message, whether I have lost or not. So this is also okay. All right. Buses, words, and dared. All right, you've lost. The puzzle word was 8. So that victory condition, that losing condition actually works very well. All right, so the game tells you if you have lost properly. Let's check if it tells you if you won properly. It's omic. Oh, not sure. No, okay, I'm not even sure how you will begin to guess this. Anyways, let's try with water and the correct word. You've won. So it gives you the correct guess, or if you've guessed it correctly, it tells you the winning condition also very properly. And because of the checks that we've added, it won't accept any more letters. So no matter how much I type in over here or select from this virtual keyboard, it's not going to do it until you press the reset button. When I press the reset button, everything needs to go back into place, but there is one error. I'm just going to fix that and come back, and then we'll look at one good look at the puzzle game one last time and say our goodbyes for this episode. Let's look at the result one more time. I have fixed the JavaScript issue that was happening when we were coding it last. It was a very simple issue with the for loop. Anyways, that's fixed. Let's try and guess this word and see if we are able to finish this game and restart it properly. All right, so I'm just going to say that my guess is sixer. Oh, it's not even the right word. SNIPE, which is for snipe. I just guessed that word snipe out of nowhere, and it tells me that 4 of the 5 words or 5 letters in the word are actually correct. So I think it is SNIDE, and I have won. All right, in just 2 tries. That's a very rare occurrence in Word. All right, I'll be honest, I already knew what the puzzle word was. Anyways, that being said, if I restart the game, it has now generated a new word, and and it has reset the board completely. So that was the Wordle game. Now the thing is, today's episode was not just about building the Wordle game. I think it is possible to programmatically guess the correct word. I think it should be done in Python. It doesn't require any AI, not a lot of advanced math. I think it's just a set of logic and some regular expressions. And that's what I'm going with this Wordle game with this week. So what we'll do, so now that we have completed the Wordle game, all of this will be, of course, available on GitHub. What we'll do next week is we'll write a Python program to solve a given Wordle game. All right, so given a guess, given a Wordle game, you type in your guess in the as parameters to a Python program, and that will tell you how close you are getting to the solution, or it will try to solve it by itself. That's what I want to do next week. So that's it about for this week. That's it about for this episode. Thank you so much for joining. This was the big end. See you next week. Bye.